Her best friend told me to my face, "You're just the safe choice." I exposed him at dinner, and she chose wrong. I've spent my entire career staring into the darkest corners of human nature. As a trial lawyer, I deal with liars, cheaters, manipulators, and every brand of broken promise you can imagine. My life is a parade of betrayal wrapped in nice suits and sworn testimonies, and yet, in the middle of all that ugliness, I had something clean, something untouchable. Her name was Emily. Emily Carter was the reason I came home at night and remembered that the world could still be kind. She was a paralegal at my firm when we met, sharp, quick, and with this relentless hunger to climb higher. She wasn't satisfied being an assistant. She wanted law school. She wanted the courtroom. She wanted a future that felt larger than the life she was born into, and I loved her for that fire. With Emily, it wasn't just romance. It was partnership. We've built things together, piece by piece. The old house I had spent years restoring finally felt like a home when she moved in. The long hours at the office made sense because I was paying for something more than bills. I was investing in us. Every dollar I put toward her tuition wasn't charity, it was faith. Faith that she would one day stand beside me, not just as the woman I loved, but as an equal in the fight I had chosen as my life's work. People look at lawyers like me and see cold calculation. They think I'm a man made of stone, someone who never lets emotion cloud judgment. But with Emily, I wasn't the prosecutor or the defense. I wasn't building cases or tearing them down. I was just a man who finally felt like he'd found solid ground. At least, that's who I thought I was. Back then, I couldn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. I didn't notice the static in the background, that low hum of something just slightly off. Because every story has more than one witness, and mine was about to introduce a new character. His name was Ryan. His name was Ryan Hale, and from the first moment I met him, I understood exactly what he was. Ryan was the kind of man who lived off charm the way most people live off oxygen. He called himself a graphic designer, sometimes an artist, depending on who was listening. In reality, he made a living designing flyers for taco joints and half-empty bars that paid him in free beer more often than cash. But to hear him talk, he was one breath away from being discovered, one gallery away from being the next great visionary. Emily adored him. She'd known him since college, back when she was still untangling herself from a toxic relationship with her musician ex. According to her, Ryan had been her lifeline. Her platonic soulmate, she called him. A brother, a protector, a right friend who saw her through heartbreak and sleepless nights. To me, he was something else entirely, a shadow that refused to leave the room. He had a way of inserting himself into our lives, not with outright disrespect, but with carefully aimed remarks, little barbs wrapped in the silk of humor. At first, I tried to brush them off. Lawyers are trained to ignore distractions, to stay focused on the core of the case. But over time, I realized these weren't harmless jokes. They were poison darts, carefully dipped and thrown with precision. Do it at dinners, over drinks, in casual conversation. Always smiling, always laughing. So Emily never saw the knife sliding between the ribs. If I mentioned a trip Emily and I were planning, Ryan would sigh wistfully and remind her of some spontaneous road trip they once took in college. If I surprised her with a new car to get her safely to school and back, Ryan would crack a joke about how reliable I was, drawing out the word like it was an insult. He didn't call me boring directly. He didn't need to. The implication was baked into every story he told. The pattern was always the same. Ryan played the part of the free spirit, the man who got her, while I was painted as the safe option, the responsible choice, the suit who couldn't possibly understand the woman he claimed to love. And Emily, she ate it up. She laughed at his jokes, defended him. When I raised an eyebrow, told me I was being paranoid. He was family, she'd say. He was there when she needed him most. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Ryan's smirk was nothing more than insecurity disguised as arrogance, that his digs were meaningless. But a lawyer learns to recognize patterns, and the pattern here was clear. He wasn't just her best friend. He was the silent third wheel in our relationship, forever rolling into the space between us. Daring me to challenge him. I didn't, not yet. I reminded myself that patience wins trials. You don't leap at the first slip of the tongue. You wait for the witness to bury themselves, and I knew. Sooner or later, Ryan would hand me the rope I needed, and he did. On the night of my greatest victory, when I thought I was finally free to breathe, Ryan decided to make his move. Looking back, I can't point to the exact moment the unease settled in. It didn't crash into me all at once. It seeped, slow and steady, like water working its way through the cracks of a foundation you thought was solid. Emily was still the woman I loved, bright, ambitious, driven. She'd come home from class brimming with energy, talking about constitutional law or the brilliance of one of her professors. I would sit there, listening, proud of her fire. But in the quiet spaces between her words, I noticed the way she looked at her phone, the way her lips curved ever so slightly when Ryan's name appeared on the screen. At first I told myself it was harmless. Friends text, friends reminisce. But those messages didn't read like jokes between old companions. They were gentle needles slipped under the skin. Late-night questions that left shadows in my mind. You sure Daniel really understands you? Remember that night on the coast, under the stars? That was real. You don't plan moments like that. You just live them. It wasn't an affair. Not in the traditional sense. There were no secret kisses, no hotel rooms, no evidence I could hold up in a courtroom. But lawyers don't just chase proof, they chase patterns. And this pattern was dangerous. It wasn't his body he was trying to give her. It was his version of the past, a memory polished until it gleamed brighter than the future I was breaking my back to build. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to slam the door shut on his influence before it could spread any further. But then she would look at me with those tired eyes, worn from studying all night, and I couldn't bring myself to add another fight to her day. I told myself patience was strength. Patience wins trials. Patience exposes liars. Still, the doubts followed me like shadows in the hallway. Was I just the safe choice? Was I only the paycheck, the provider, the stable ground she could stand on until something more thrilling came along? Every time Ryan laughed at my expense and Emily defended him, a hairline crack widened. The irony is that I believed I had time. I believed I could wait for Ryan to overstep, to reveal himself. I didn't realize the clock was already ticking, and that the case I thought I was building would explode open in the middle of my own celebration. Because when victory finally came, when I should have been basking in the glow of triumph, Ryan saw his chance, and he took it. Winning that case felt like dragging myself out of a grave I'd been buried in for half a year. 6 months of 12-hour days, weekends lost to discovery files, nights spent hunched over legal pads until my eyes blurred, and then victory. Not just a win, but the win, the kind that makes careers, the kind that puts your name on the firm's wall. So I decided to celebrate. I opened my home, the house I had restored with my own hands, and filled it with the people who had carried me through the grind, friends who hadn't seen me in months, colleagues who knew what this victory meant, mentors who'd once doubted. If I had it in me, the night was meant to be a reward, a breath, a pause before the next mountain to climb. Emily helped plan it. She insisted on inviting her circle to end. That, of course, meant Ryan. The house glowed with warmth that evening. Candles flickered against polished wood. The best wine I owned breathed in crystal glasses. Laughter spilled across the dining room, weaving itself into the clink of silverware and the low hum of music. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, lighter, unburdened. And then Ryan arrived. He slid into the evening as though he belonged there, a glass of wine in his hand before he'd even removed his coat. He smiled wide, too wide, the smile of a man who wanted everyone to see how comfortable he was in another man's home. He told stories no one asked for, about art exhibits and creative spirits, about living beyond the grind while sipping a vintage I'd been saving for years. I tried to ignore it. I told myself not to let him under my skin, but then his voice cut through the laughter, sharp as a blade. "You know, it's funny," he said, his eyes fixed on me as though the rest of the table had vanished. "There are two kinds of people. In the world, the creators and the suits. Some of us are driven by passion, by art, and others," he swirled his glass, smirking, "others are just practical, reliable." The word hung there like smoke. Reliable, spoken like an insult. My friends caught it. Their eyes darted to me, waiting for a response. I gave him nothing. A lawyer knows when to hold silence like a weapon. But Ryan wasn't done. He leaned closer to Emily, put on that mask of false concern he wore so well, and delivered the line that cracked the room wide open. "I just hope you're happy, Em. I mean, Daniel's a great guy. Stable, he provides, he's dependable. But let's be honest," he paused, savoring the moment. His eyes locked onto mine. The smirk sharpened. "You could do way better." Then him, the table froze. Forks clattered against porcelain. My closest friends, the ones who had seen me bleed for this win, looked ready to leap across the table and silence him themselves. But Emily just stared at her plate, cheeks burning with embarrassment, not anger. And that was the moment. The rope I'd been waiting for. Ryan had handed it to me, looped neatly, ready for the noose. I set my silverware down, folded my hands on the table, and lifted my gaze to him. The host was gone. The lawyer remained. The cross-examination was about to begin. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fist against the table. That's what Ryan expected. He wanted a shouting match. Something messy, something he could later twist into a story about how I lost control. But a good lawyer doesn't give the witness what he wants. He corners him with questions until he buries himself. So I leaned forward, folded my hands, and spoke as though I were addressing a jury. "That's a bold claim, Ryan. I'm curious, what does a better man for Emily look like? Please, be specific." His smirk faltered. He wasn't prepared for cross-examination. "Well, he stammered, "someone more on her level. A creative. Someone who really gets her." I nodded, calm, almost encouraging. A creative, interesting standard. "And I suppose you see yourself as fitting that description." "I think I understand her better than anyone," he said, puffing his chest as if the declaration alone made it true. "Perfect," I replied. "So you're the gold standard. Let's examine that." The room was silent now, every eye fixed on us. My friends leaned back, like jurors waiting for the evidence to unfold. "Let's talk about something tangible. Investment. As everyone here knows, Emily is in her second year of law school, a top-tier program with a top-tier price tag. I pay for that. Every class, every book, every exam I investment because I believe in her future. Now tell me, Ryan, what have you invested in her future lately, other than your opinions of me?" Color drained from his face. He fumbled with his glass, buying time, but there was none to be bought. "Let's move on," I pressed. "The car she drives safe, reliable, gets her to school and back. I bought that too. Meanwhile, your car, if we can call it that, breaks down so often Emily has had to loan you money 3 times in 6 months. Money she pulled from our household account. Money I earned. In other words, Ryan, not only am I investing in Emily's future, I'm also keeping your little convertible alive." "You're welcome." A snort of laughter escaped one of my friends before he quickly covered it with a cough. Ryan's jaw tightened, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the evidence. "And finally," I said, lowering my voice, "the roof over her head. This house? I bought it. I restored it. I maintain it. You, on the other hand, can't seem to keep rent paid on a studio apartment without borrowing from Emily. So let's summarize. By your logic, a man who provides a home, a car, and a fully funded education is the lesser choice. And the better man is one who drains her resources, sabotages her relationship, and hides his obsession behind the word friendship. Is that an accurate reflection of your position, Ryan?" He froze, like a witness caught in perjury with no escape. His lips parted, but no words came out. He stared at me, humiliated, a performer stripped of his mask. I leaned back in my chair. The closing argument delivered. The jury didn't need deliberation. The verdict was written across every face at the table. Contempt, disgust, silence, so thick you could cut it with a knife. But not from Emily. I turned to her, waiting for relief, for gratitude, for the acknowledgement that the truth had been spoken at last. Instead, what I saw in her eyes wasn't relief. It was fury. She shoved her chair back, the scrape of wood against the floor breaking the silence like a gunshot. She trembled as she glared at me. "I cannot believe you just did that," she hissed. "You humiliated him in front of everyone." "He humiliated himself," I said quietly. "I only presented the evidence." Her eyes blazed. "Apologize to him right now, or we're done." And just like that, the trial shifted. The verdict wasn't about Ryan anymore. It was about us. The room held its breath. Ryan sat pale and silent, crushed under the weight of what I had laid bare. My friends exchanged glances, each of them wearing the same expression: justice served. But Emily was trembling, her fury aimed not at him, not at the parasite who had just been dismantled, but at me. "Apologize," she demanded, her voice shaking. "Apologize to him right now." I stared at her, searching her eyes for even a flicker of recognition, some sign that she understood what had just happened. But what I found instead was a wall built out of anger and loyalty twisted in the wrong direction. "Emily," I said quietly, "he's the one who insulted me in our home, in front of everyone we know. He humiliated himself." Her chair scraped back farther, the legs screeching against the floor. "You don't get it. You don't talk to him like that. I don't care what he said. You went too far. You crossed a line." The silence in the room deepened. No one dared to speak, though I could feel my friends bristling with disbelief. Ryan still hadn't lifted his head. He was nothing now, a man stripped bare. Yet somehow, impossibly, she was standing beside him, defending him. "Apologize," she repeated, her voice cutting through the air. "Or we're finished." There it was, the verdict. The case that had been building quietly for years had finally reached its breaking point. The woman I had believed in, the woman I had invested in, the woman I thought would stand beside me, had just chosen her witness over her partner. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. A lawyer knows when the trial is over, when the jury has already made up its mind. So I simply looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her with perfect clarity. The love I carried for her didn't fade. It didn't wither. It was executed, swiftly and without appeal. I smiled, a small, tired smile that said more than words ever could. Then I rose from my chair, lifted my glass, and walked out of the dining room, leaving her standing in the wreckage of the moment she had created. The trial was over. The verdict was final. But consequences always arrive later. The night of the dinner ended, not with an argument, but with a silence that spoke louder than any words could. Emily stormed out with Ryan at her side, still trembling with anger, and for a brief second she looked back, as if expecting me to chase her. But I didn't move. I let the door close behind them, and with it, I let the life I thought we had built close to. She believed it was temporary. She believed she had drawn a line in the sand, and that I, like so many others before me, would step over it to prove my devotion. She thought I would call, beg, plead, that I would do whatever it took to pull her back. What she never understood was that the trial was finished, the record was sealed. So I went dark. No texts, no calls, no explanations. Silence became my verdict. For 2 weeks, her messages poured in. At first, rage, then confusion, then desperation, one after another, unanswered. She sent friends to speak on her behalf, to urge me to forgive, to move on, to not throw away 3 years. I listened politely, but I didn't bend. A lawyer doesn't reopen a case once the judgment is rendered. Instead, I got to work. Our house, the house I had restored with my hands, the place that once felt alive with her laughter now, felt like a crime scene. Every chair, every picture, every faint trace of her was evidence of a broken contract. So I did what lawyers do. I settled the estate. I moved methodically, box after box. Every item she owned was packed away, stacked neatly in the spare room. It wasn't rage that guided me. It was precision, a cleansing. By the time I finished, the house no longer felt like ours. It felt like mine again. Then came the calls. Not pleasant, but necessary. The first was to the dean of admissions at her law school. I explained, calmly and professionally, that due to a permanent change in my personal circumstances, the private scholarship fund I had established in her name would be dissolved, effective immediately. Tuition for her final semester was due in a matter of weeks. Without me, there would be no payment. The second was to my firm's managing partner. I had personally pulled strings to secure Emily a coveted summer internship position that could launch her career. I informed him that, due to an irreconcilable personal conflict of interest, the offer had to be rescinded. He understood. At my firm, conflicts are taken seriously. I didn't take joy in those calls. They weren't acts of revenge. They were the natural consequences of a verdict she herself had demanded. When she told me to apologize or lose her, she believed she held the gavel. What she didn't realize was that she had already handed me the file marked over. By the end of those 2 weeks, the silence between us wasn't just distance. It was finality, but silence never lasts forever. Eventually, the witness returns to the stand, desperate for a second chance to testify. And that moment came one gray afternoon, when she appeared at my door with desperation in her eyes and her old key useless in her hand. 2 weeks after the dinner, she came back. I saw her before she even knocked. The security camera caught her, standing on the porch, shoulders hunched against the cold, her hand fumbling with the key that no longer worked. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief, then the sharp sting of realization. She tried again and again, her movements more frantic each time, until finally she froze, the truth settling in. The locks had changed. The door she once walked through freely was now a barrier. When the bell rang, I let her wait a few seconds. Before answering, I opened the door, just enough to meet her eyes, the chain still in place. She looked nothing like the woman who had stormed out in righteous fury. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, her clothes rumpled like she hadn't cared. Enough to smooth them out. The fire that once lit her eyes was gone, replaced by something heavier: exhaustion, fear, desperation. "Daniel, we need to talk," she whispered. "No, Emily," I said. "We don't." She flinched, as though the words themselves had weight. "It was a fight," she pleaded. "People say things they don't mean. You can't just throw away 3 years over one night." I shook my head. "It wasn't a fight. It was the truth. You made a choice. You stood beside him, not me. You demanded that I apologize to the man who has been trying to dismantle us from the beginning. That wasn't anger speaking. That was loyalty, and it wasn't mine." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached for the door, but the chain held. "I wasn't thinking. I was angry. I thought you'd understand. Please, Daniel, don't do this. We can fix it." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I almost saw the woman I used to come home to, the one who once made all the long nights worth it. But the image dissolved as quickly as it appeared. What stood on my porch was not that woman. What stood there was someone who had gambled everything on another man and lost. "Emily," I said, my tone firm but quiet, "I already accepted your terms. You told me to apologize or we were finished. I chose finished. There is no appeal." Her tears broke into sobs, spilling down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead against the frame of the door. "But what about school? What about my internship?" "I can't." I let the silence stretch heavy and deliberate before I spoke. "Your tuition is due next week. The scholarship is gone. And the internship, it no longer exists. That chapter has been closed." She staggered back, her hands trembling as though she'd been struck. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "You can't do that. Please, Daniel, you can't." "I already did," I said. "Actions have consequences. You demanded I choose, and I chose." Her sobs deepened. I watched the realization sink in her future. The one she had counted on, the one I had built for her, was gone. All of it. And there was nothing Ryan could do to replace it. Ag closed the door gently, the chain sliding into place. The sound echoed like the final strike of a gavel. The case was closed, but consequences are never instant. They play out slowly, painfully, and publicly, and hers were only just beginning. When I closed that door, I knew it wasn't the end of the story. It never is. In court, the gavel doesn't just signal that a case is over, it signals that the consequences are about to begin. And in life, those consequences are often far harsher than anything the courtroom can deliver. The first blow fell quickly. Without the scholarship, tuition for her final semester was due in full. $50,000. A mountain too steep for a woman who had built her future on the assumption that someone else had already paid the toll. Within weeks, her name disappeared from the roster. Emily Carter, law student, was no more. The second blow came just as swiftly. The internship she had bragged about to her classmates, the golden ticket into a career she thought was waiting for. Hurt evaporated. My firm rescinded the offer quietly, professionally, with a simple explanation about conflict of interest. Word spread fast in those circles. Suddenly, the girl who once walked into rooms with a plan had no plan at all. Doors that had once been held open were now firmly shut. And then came the third blow, the one no resume could conceal. Her reality with Ryan, they moved in together the night of the dinner. A decision born of rage and humiliation, not love. What she found waiting for her wasn't romance or salvation. It was a one-room studio with peeling paint, unpaid bills, and a man who believed late-night rants about creative freedom counted as progress. The same man who had promised her she could do better was now proving every day that she had done worse. I didn't need to see it firsthand. Word trickled back through mutual friends. Ryan's gigs dried up. He borrowed money he couldn't pay back. The two of them argued loudly enough for neighbors to complain. Emily, once fueled by ambition, now dragged herself through temp jobs just to keep the lights on. The resentment grew between them like rot, until what little bond they had was poisoned by bitterness. I imagined her lying awake at night in that cramped apartment, staring at the ceiling, realizing she had traded stability for chaos, partnership for sabotage, a future for a dead end. I imagined her remembering the ultimatum she had delivered, the line she had drawn in fire, and the way I hadn't stepped over it, and that was the hammer. Not a single strike, but a series of blows, each one heavier than the last, each one pounding away at the illusion she had built. But here's the thing about a hammer. It doesn't just break, it reshapes. And what remained of Emily after those blows was no longer the woman I once loved. She was a shell, living proof of what happens when loyalty is tested and found wanting. I wasn't angry, I wasn't triumphant. I simply watched from a distance, quiet, steady, resolved, because I knew the fallout was complete. And yet, in the silence that followed, I found myself asking a question no verdict could answer. What happens to the man who walks away? In trials, the aftermath is rarely dramatic. The verdict is read, the gavel falls, and the courtroom empties. But outside those walls, the consequences ripple. They move through lives, dismantling illusions piece by piece until the truth stands alone. That's exactly what happened here. Emily's life unraveled quietly, almost clinically, as if fate itself had picked up a scalpel. Without tuition, she withdrew from law school just months shy of graduating. Everything she had worked toward, the long nights, the endless studying, the certainty that her future was carved in stone, was gone. A career that might have been promising ended before it ever began. Her reputation suffered too. The internship she once flaunted as her entry into a powerful firm became a story whispered in hallways, rescinded, gone, a black mark no one wanted to touch. She didn't just lose opportunities, she lost credibility. And in the world she was trying to enter, credibility is currency. Then there was Ryan. He was never the answer, he was the question she refused to stop asking. In that small, suffocating apartment, his charm wore thin. Bills piled up, temp jobs became her lifeline. Resentment spread like mold, and the man, who had sworn she could do better, proved day after day that he was far worse. Friends told me about the fights, about her bitterness, about the quiet despair of someone who realized too late that she had thrown away a lifeline and chosen an anchor instead. But this isn't just her aftermath. It was mine too. I wish I could say I felt victorious, that I walked away satisfied, carrying the smug certainty of a man proven right. I didn't. What I felt was quieter, heavier, a kind of emptiness that comes when you've invested years into building something only to tear it down with your own hands. My home was cleaner, lighter without her, but at night it echoed the silence that once felt like peace, sometimes pressed in like a weight. I told myself it was better this way on. It was, but even correct verdicts carry grief. You don't spend years building a future and walk away without scars. In time, I began to rebuild. I poured myself into work, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. The courtroom was safe ground. Cases had rules, evidence, procedure, life. Outside those walls was far murkier. Yet, with every win, every client defended, every truth exposed, I found a measure of balance. I heard about Emily less and less. She faded from conversations, from social circles, until she was little more than a name mentioned in passing. Ryan, too, slipped into obscurity, his grand artistic destiny never materializing. Together, they became a cautionary tale, whispered among old friends, and me. I learned something I should have known all along, that endings aren't defined by shouting or revenge or even heartbreak. They're defined by silence, by the simple act of walking away and refusing to look back. That was my aftermath. Not triumph, not tragedy, just clarity, but clarity carries a lesson. And the lesson was this: when you say you're done, you have to mean it. People throw the word around so casually, "I'm done." They say it in arguments, in passing, as if it's a threat meant to scare someone into falling back in line. Most of the time, they don't mean it. They leave the door cracked, hoping someone will step through with flowers or apologies or promises to do better. But real done is different. Real done is quiet. It isn't born out of rage or spite or even heartbreak. It's born out of clarity. Emily gave me her ultimatum: apologize to Ryan or lose. She believed she was still holding the gavel. She believed she was forcing my hand, that I would scramble to prove my loyalty, to patch the cracks she refused to see. What she never realized was that, in that moment, the trial had already ended. She delivered her terms, and I accepted them, without argument, without appeal. Done didn't mean shouting, it meant silence. Done didn't mean revenge. It meant removing my investment, cutting every tie, reclaiming what I had built, and leaving her to live inside the ruins she had chosen. Done meant refusing to chase her, refusing to beg, refusing to reopen a case that was already closed, and in the end, that silence was louder than any outburst. It was the sound of the world shifting beneath her feet, of support systems vanishing, of futures collapsing. She wanted to know what done really meant. She learned it piece by piece, through tuition bills unpaid, through doors that no longer opened, through nights spent in a cold apartment beside a man who had promised the world but delivered nothing. But I learned something too. I learned that being done isn't about punishing someone else. It's about protecting yourself. It's about drawing a line that doesn't move, about saying this far and no further, and then standing by it even when the silence hurts. So yes, Emily learned what done really means, but so did I. It means the trial is over. The evidence has been weighed. The verdict has been delivered. And the courtroom is empty. That is the end. In the end, there was no dramatic fight, no second chance, no reconciliation, just silence. That's what done really means when you walk away and never look back. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There are many more family drama stories waiting for you, each one as gripping as this.